Now, I'm just finalising the script for my next post office inquiry video, and I'm hoping to get that filmed and up on my channel fairly soon. I know it's been a month since my last video. Apologies for the delay. But meantime, I got an interesting request for a different type of video. Now, I'm doing a terrible job responding to all the comments to my videos, but I am getting there. I do read every comment, and I'm keeping a note of the requests for videos that you're making. And one of those requests came to me recently, and it stood out to me, and I thought I should get to this one first. It does relate to the post office scandal, but it's a bit more of a general issue. And it came from Lynn. So hi, Lynn. Lynn's been giving me some wonderful encouragement, so I owe you this one, Lynn. Now, saying that, I might have picked up completely the wrong end of the stick, so let me know if I have. But I think this is about the issue of vexatious complaints. And at the end, I'll link us all back to the UK post office scandal, because I think this is an important thing to help us understand what happened in the scandal. And I also know that a lot of people are tuning into my videos wanting me to keep my focus on that scandal for a bit longer. So I'll do that. So vexatious complaints. Let's get to it. So what is a vexatious complaint? Well, it's a complaint that is made against someone where the complaint has no grounds, and it's intended to cause harm, like harassment, distress, damage to reputation, stuff like that. But a vexatious complaint can also be one that does have grounds, but the merit of making the complaint is way less than the burden caused to the person being complained about. So these are often trivial complaints where the thing being complained about is something someone's done, which maybe they shouldn't have done, but it's not a big thing, but complaining about it will cause that person harm. So example would be, say, my spelling is terrible, as is my pronunciation, but my spelling is really awful. So I might write an email to someone with a spelling mistake in it, but not the sort of mistake that's going to cause any major problem, just a simple little spelling error. Now, someone might complain that I sent an email with a spelling mistake. You know, it's a pretty trivial thing they're complaining about. But if that complaint gets looked into and then I have to apologise for writing the email with a spelling mistake in it, I'm going to look like a right idiot. I'm going to look incompetent to management when, maybe I'm not incompetent. But actually, I do make a lot of spelling mistakes because I am incompetent. So that's probably not a good example. But it's just a trivial complaint that's complained about just to cause some harassment or distress to the person that you're complaining about. So what makes these complaints vexatious is that the complainant's motivation is to cause a person harm over and above anything else. So they didn't care about the spelling error, they just want me to cause me some grief. But a vexatious complaint can also be a thing a person is accused of who is making a complaint in good faith. And here, the claim that the complaint is vexatious is intended to dismiss the complaint in a way that maximizes harm to the person making the complaint, the complainant. Now, vexatious complaints can be really damaging for the person who's being complained about, but it can also be very damaging for the complainant if they're accused of making a vexatious complaint when they haven't. And both of these things have to be taken seriously because they cause real harm. But too often they aren't taken seriously, particularly by managers. And when a person has been complained about and the complaint is found to be groundless and that person raises their concern that maybe the complaint was vexatious, that concern can get dismissed because, hey, what's your problem? The complaint wasn't upheld, so why don't you just move on? Forget about it. The problem is that the person is left feeling unsafe. The person who complained about them might have been trying to harm them. And no one seems concerned about that. But also, if you make a complaint in good faith and it gets dismissed as vexatious, as in they tell you stop trying to cause trouble, then you get labelled as a troublemaker, and you can't complain about that because you know that will mean they will then see you as an even bigger troublemaker, and that leaves your reputation besmirched and you don't have a chance to defend yourself. Now, if you're in an organisation where vexatious complaints can be easily made, that's usually a sign there's something wrong in the organisational culture. You may have poor managers, poor policies, poor governance, maybe all of that. So what would good management, good policies, good governance look like? Well, that would be having a proper complaints process. Vexatious complaints can be avoided if there's a proper complaints system in place. And there are two aspects of this. The first is the fairness of the process that looks into the complaints. And the second is the allocation of roles, who gets involved in which bits of the complaint process. And remember, all of this applies to what should happen when someone complains about you, and that includes when someone accuses you of making a vexatious complaint. So the fairness of the process. This is known as abiding by the principles of natural justice, principles that are supposed to be embedded in all organisations and all workplaces. It's also known as fair process or due process. And there are three aspects to it, which are procedural fairness, informational fairness, and interpersonal fairness. Procedural fairness means that when a complaint is made, it should be investigated, and that involves the person being complained about being given the opportunity to address the complaint, to have an opportunity to defend themselves. And that opportunity must be given before any determination's been made on the merits of the complaint. And the person being complained about should be told about how the investigation will proceed, who will be involved, what evidence will be sought, who or where it will be sought from, and those sorts of things. The procedure has to be both fair and transparent, and that applies equally to the complainant, the person making the complaint, as well as the person being complained about. Now, informational fairness, well, that means sharing the information available to the investigator with the person being complained about. So you show them what you found, and you also show them the complaint. It's particularly important that they get to see the complaint. And they also need to be informed about who made the complaint. If the identity of the person making the complaint has to be kept confidential, then there has to be limits on how far the complaint process can proceed, if it can proceed at all. Because if you are the person being complained about and you don't know who's doing the complaining, who's complaining about you, then you can't fully defend yourself against those complaints. So if you don't have the opportunity to properly defend yourself, then you can't really proceed with that complaint process. Well, you shouldn't anyway. So you should always get to see any evidence that's been collected that either supports or refutes the complaint, as well as being able to see the complaint. Interpersonal fairness is the right to be treated with dignity and respect. And a key thing here is that the person looking into the complaint can't go around telling other people about the complaint, and certainly shouldn't be going around telling others about their thoughts on the merits of the complaint. If you don't treat everyone involved in that complaint procedure, that investigation, if you don't treat them with dignity and respect, you aren't going to get people making complaints, because they'll be worried that they'll be made to look bad in the process, or they'll only make complaints anonymously, and that can mean you have bad things happening in an organisation that you could do little or anything about. So you don't want that. Now, let's get to that second aspect of the complaints process, what a good complaints process looks like, and that's the separation of roles. There are three main roles when it comes to dealing with a complaint. First, there's the complainant, the person who's making the complaint. Then, second, there's the investigator, the person who investigates the complaint. And third, there's the decision maker, the person who decides on the merit of the complaint, and if the complaint has grounds, to decide what actions should be taken. Now, these three roles ideally need to be separated out so that a different person undertakes each. And this is crucial in the case of serious complaints, ones involving disciplinary action or allegations about criminal behaviour. So, the person who makes the complaint should never be the person who then investigates the complaint. The investigator needs to be fully independent and separate from the person making the complaint. And the reason for that is pretty obvious. If I think you've done something wrong, I can't be the person that investigates that because I've already concluded that you've done something wrong. It's also important that the decision maker is not the same person as the complainant or the investigator. The decision maker is there to receive the outcome of the investigation from the investigator and to judge the merits of the complaint for themselves. Now, it's perhaps obvious why the complainant can't be the decision maker. Same reason they can't be the investigator. The reason why the investigator can't be the decision maker is less obvious. The reason is that when someone does an investigation, they become partial through having a moral response to what they're investigating. They're investigating alleged wrongdoing, and determining something is wrong is a moral response. And moral responses are powerful. You can get caught up in them to the point that the wrongdoing starts to feel like you've been wronged as the investigator. You can take it personally. I saw this a lot when I had to deal with university staff who investigated a student they were suspected of cheating on an assignment. Some of them got swept up by it and became really quite either disappointed with the student or even angry with the student about what they thought the student had done. If someone investigates you and says that they've found something that you've done has made them feel either disappointed or even angry, get the hell out of there as soon as you can and make sure that person doesn't get to decide whether you have done anything wrong, and if you have done anything wrong, what should happen to you. Because if they're saying they're disappointed with you or angry with you, that's that problem. It's their moral response to their investigation into what they think is you doing something wrong, and it's all become wrapped up, and they're the worst person to decide finally on the investigation whether you have done something wrong, and they shouldn't be deciding on what action to take. So, don't let that happen. Now, when that wrongdoing is minor, and the investigator's not getting swept up by the morality of the wrongdoing, then the roles of the investigator and decision maker can be combined, but you should try to keep those roles apart if you can, because sometimes it can surprise people how they get overcome by the moral position they find themselves adopting when they start investigating a complaint. Now, if an organisation doesn't follow that sort of a process, if it doesn't follow fair process, doesn't separate out those roles, between the complainant, investigator, decision maker, you often get a culture where vexatious complaints can happen unfettered. Both people making complaints in bad faith, purposefully to hurt others, but also people who just label complaints that have been made in good faith as being malicious and therefore vexatious, and they do that to silence the person who's making the complaint or to cause them harm. Now, what's this got to do with the UK Post Office scandal? Well, let's get to that and then we'll finish up. So the tie to the Post Office scandal. Well, what we saw in the Post Office scandal was a lack of informational fairness towards sub-postmasters. This is reflected in those problems around disclosure. Sub-postmasters were accused of theft, but not given all the information that was available to the prosecutor. Information that the Horizon system was faulty. They had a problem of interpersonal fairness. We saw terrible treatment of sub-postmasters by auditors, investigators, and this stuff was happening to their face. And we saw some of this being reported on in the session with Stephen Bradshaw when he was giving his evidence. But it was also there in the way the post office lawyers and post office managers talked in derogatory ways about sub-postmasters, accusing them of acting in bad faith and denigrating the character of those sub-postmasters. And that's where we saw sub-postmasters who complained about the Horizon system as being treated as vexatious complainants. They were just trying to bash the Horizon system. That was what the post office were calling the Horizon bash and bandwagon.
Guildford Crown Court. The above name was found guilty of theft. This case turned from a relatively straightforward general deficiency case to an unprecedented attack on the Horizon system. We were beset with, I think this should read, an unparalleled degree of disclosure requests by the defence through the hard work of everyone, Counsel Warwick Tatford, Investigation Officer John Longman, and through the considerable expertise of Gareth Jenkins of Fujitsu. We were able to destroy, to the criminal standard of proof, beyond all reasonable doubt, every single suggestion made by the defence. It's to be hoped that the case will set a marker to dissuade other defendants from jumping on the Horizon bashing bandwagon. Would you agree that the language that you used is quite breathless and rather emotive in describing the outcome of Mrs. Misra's case?
Yes.
Why did you use breathless and emotive language?
Well, I think the last bit is wrong.
He's going to figure in my next video quite heavily. Okay, so there was that going on. We also saw a lack of procedural fairness, and that was most notable in how investigators, auditors, and post office lawyers failed to fulfill their legal obligations regarding the way they conducted their investigations. They failed to follow the ACAS Code of Practice on Disciplinary and Grievance Procedures, but they moreover failed in their duty of care to sub-postmasters, and they also failed in their duty to follow disclosure rules. And we also saw problems in roles not being properly separated, with investigators advocating for criminal prosecutions of sub-postmasters and in effect seeking to act in that role of decision-maker as well as investigator. In the research briefing for the Post Office Horizon System Offences Bill, this was described as a lack of organisational separation between the investigative and prosecutorial aspects of the prosecutions, leading to a lack of independent oversight and objectivity. That's the issue of how investigators should never be the decision makers in cases where people are accused of serious wrongdoing. And all of this lack of fairness in that process of making a complaint, in this case the post office making a complaint against their sub-postmasters, well, that lack of fairness all got fully laid out into the public arena in phase 4 of the public inquiry, when that started up again in 2024 on January the 11th, shortly after the airing of Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, the TV drama. And that's when the scandal fully captured the public attention in the UK, but also all around the world, and caught the attention of people here in Australia. And on that day, when everyone was watching the public hearing, many people for the first time, we had the unfortunate ex-Post Office investigator, Stephen Bradshaw, just mentioned him. Well, he was sat in front of us that day when it all came out.
She says, I have received threatening calls to my mobile phone and emails from Stephen Bradshaw and Brian Trotter. Mr. Bradshaw was a post office security officer and Mr. Trotter was a post office contracts manager. And what she says, that, and then she goes on to say, I've received particularly intimidating telephone calls from Stephen Bradshaw, who began calling me before I knew he worked for the post office. He didn't identify himself in his calls, he just made demands of me. Now, what I want to put to you is what you did. You would introduce yourself sometimes. You would say, where has the money gone? Why won't you talk to me? Why won't you meet me at the branch? I've got people who I want to defund the branch. She would find you aggressive and hang up on you, and you would call her back repeatedly, and you called her over 60 times during this period. Is that right? Do you recall that?
I wouldn't say that was completely accurate. The two audits, one took place on the 26th of October, one took place on the 27th of October. I called Mr. Siddiqui on the 4th of November and left a message. I always, on any phone call, always say who I am and leave my mobile number. I called again on the 8th because I hadn't received the call back. On the 10th of November, Mr. Siddiqui called me because I sent in an email later on with the words, our telephone conversation refers, and on that email, as I explained who it was. And it was about arranging a time or place as per what my contract was as a role to do an interview.
That's not true. You hounded her, didn't you?
No, I didn't.
Well, then let's go to the next paragraph, shall we? Let's go to paragraph 84. Because this is what happened. On the 29th of November 2016 at 13:44, Stephen Bradshaw called me and I refused to speak to him because I didn't know who he was or who he worked for. In that telephone call, which was witnessed by my husband on loudspeaker, he called me a bitch, which I found extremely distressing. That's how you behave towards my client.
Completely untrue. I do not call anybody that type of name. And she did know who it was because she received an email from me on the 10th of November.
And if we scroll down, it is essentially a complaint from him. And if we scroll down further, we see he says, the document investigation is a document of history of events and chain of activities carried out and conducted by the investigators known as Mr. Steve Bradshaw. He doesn't know the name of the person from Royal Mail. And over the page, he says, Miss Diane, presumably that's Diane Matthews. Or was there another Diane who you worked with?
It's probably Diane Matthews.
He says, this document is based on unpleasant experience, inappropriate exercise and improper conduct of practice, unbearable attitude, harassment and victimisation, bully faced by Mr. Saeed and the family during the unfair and undue suspension and investigation process. Could we turn over to page 57, which is where the substance of the allegation is? He says, I entered into the house. Mr. Bradshaw, with one of his lady colleague called Diane, was waiting for me. Steve Bradshaw stood up, shook the hands. Mr. Bradshaw showed me his identity, offered for them to be seated. He pulled out some forms from a file he had and asked me to sign. The forms were not ordinary, they were legal forms, consent to search my house. Mr. Bradshaw told me they came to search my house, whether I stashed money, post office paperwork or financial documents. I was astonished and very unhappy and reluctant. Mr. Bradshaw threatened me if I do not consent, they'll call the police who arrest DNA, detained me and ruin my house by digging and lifting floorboards. He says, during the interview, Mr. Bradshaw stressed, shouted, and tried to put words into my mouth that I stole the money. That was very offensive and unacceptable. But I replied and rejected his attempts to make me take the words and answer no, never. This is a letter sent in 2009 from a Katie Noblet. I believe she was the sub-postmistress in Preston in Lancashire. The following day, Mr. Bradshaw and Miss Richards came to my place of work and asked if I wanted to make a statement. Without introducing himself, I told them I didn't know because I hadn't had a chance to seek legal advice in under 24 hours when I worked 9 to 5, 6 days a week. I found Steve very confrontational. I told Steve that I wouldn't make a statement without legal representation, and he told me that I wasn't allowed one, which is a complete lie. She says, after a very confrontational 5 minutes, and after Steve didn't get what he wanted, Steve told Caroline to close the post office, which is not his authority to do. As I understand, Steve and Caroline left the store. Now, as I say, these aren't case studies. We haven't looked into these cases at all or in any depth whatsoever. But can you assist us with why it is that your name seems to crop up again and again?
I can't understand because they're not totally accurate.
Now, of course, Stephen, would deny it. Why wouldn't he? So, let's leave it there. I hope that was of help, Lynn. Do let me know if I've completely missed the mark on that one and didn't make the video that you were hoping for. Now, we had the lovely Mr. Blake in that last clip, and I want to leave Mr. Blake there and turn to someone else in the inquiry for my next videos. This is the one I'm making that I hope to get out fairly soon. I want to make the next video on our magnificent Mr. Beer, and I want to tell you what I think are his best bits. So, there you go. So that'll come out soon if it's of any interest. So if you like the videos, click like and subscribe. Helps the channel. I don't make any money out of it, but it's good if we can get some of these videos watched, just in case they're of interest to people. Okay, thanks for watching this one. Really appreciate it. Till next time. Ta-da.